Two twin girls vanished without a trace from their backyard on a summer noon in 1991, and the entire United States was shaken by the absolute silence that lingered for 3 decades. No bodies were found, no one was arrested, and memories slowly decayed like the wooden house hidden deep in the forest. Until 30 years later, a dog unwittingly dug up a box concealing the truth, and the past began to scream again through each relic, each forgotten scar. In the summer of 1991, the town of Maple Hollow nestled quietly among Oregon's pine ridges, where wooden houses cast shadows over lush green lawns and children ran around under the afternoon sun without a care. Yet, on a sweltering June noon, that peace shattered into the first crack of loss, a tragedy that 30 years later, the town still whispered about like a scar that wouldn't fade. Maggie Whitmore was preparing lunch in the pristine white kitchen of the rustic home she and her husband Thomas had built with earnings from his appliance repair shop. She chopped carrots, stirred sauce in a pot, and occasionally glanced out the window at her twin daughters, Lena and Lara, playing in the backyard. The girls wore pink floral cotton dresses, their hair braided on both sides, their laughter mingling with the sound of birds. The Whitmore backyard was enclosed by a white-painted wooden fence, and the gate leading to the small forest beyond was always locked. But when Maggie turned away for just a few minutes to check the meat and called her daughters in for lunch, only the rustling wind and the gently swaying swing remained, as if someone had just left. "Lena? Lara?" she called once, then twice, her voice rising and trembling. She stepped onto the porch, her shoes scraping the stone tiles, and reached the backyard. No one answered. A plate of cookies sat untouched on the small wooden table. 2 glasses of orange juice remained undrunk. The back gate, wide open. Maggie froze. She ran toward the gate, her heart pounding as if it might burst. No sound of children's footsteps, no signs of a struggle. Only the damp forest soil and faint bicycle tire tracks along the grass's edge. When Thomas returned from work, police cars lined the front of the house, blue and red lights flashed, neighbors gathered outside the fence, and Maggie sat slumped on the porch, hair disheveled, eyes vacant like someone unhinged. A search team was immediately deployed, scent dogs, helicopters circling the pine forest, volunteers setting up tents, dividing maps marked with every tree and stream, but not a trace, not a cry, not a single solid clue. Investigators began suspecting those closest to the family. Thomas was questioned for 8 hours, while Maggie underwent a psychological evaluation. All for nothing. No signs of a break-in, no evidence of an abduction. Gradually, the media stopped reporting. The search teams withdrew. People called it the Whitmore incident and forgot, but Maggie never did. Every year on June 14th, she placed 2 bouquets by the backyard gate, where she last heard her daughter's laughter. She kept Lena and Lara's room untouched. 2 small beds side by side, dusty stuffed animals, dolls with closed eyes under the sunset glow through the curtains. Thomas couldn't bear the pain. In 2003, he died in a car accident on an early winter morning commute. Maggie believed he had been gone long before, his heart merely still beating. After Thomas's death, Maggie lived quietly like a shadow in the small town where everyone had grown accustomed to her tragedy, no longer mentioning it. But she still waited for something to return. A shoe, a voice, a confession. And then, 30 years later, a dog digging in the forest touched that crack, splitting it open once more. But for now, Maggie didn't know. She only stood silently by the kitchen window, watching the afternoon sun fall over the parched lawn, recalling the twins' laughter echoing from days too distant to hold, yet too close to forget. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated with the latest stories. The house next door had been for sale for nearly 4 months. And finally, someone moved in during early fall 2021. Maggie noticed a silver pickup truck parked in the front yard. A woman about 50, petite, with neatly tied brown hair, leading a large gray-furred dog, a Malamute Husky mix. Her name was Diane Murdoch, recently moved from Washington State. And after a few chance encounters at the post office and grocery store, Diane warmly invited Maggie over for tea. Maggie hesitated at first, but partly out of courtesy, and partly due to the loneliness accumulated over the years, she couldn't refuse the kind gesture. Diane's new home was still cluttered with moving boxes, but the living room was neatly arranged. The wall behind the sofa displayed a row of landscape photos, black and white and muted color shots, mostly capturing nature at dawn or with dew still clinging to leaves. I love taking photos when I walk Scout, Diane said, gently stroking the dog's thick fur as he lay at her feet. The forest behind this area is beautiful, with so many unique corners. Maggie nodded, her eyes scanning the frames. Then her gaze stopped, a pang in her chest. The fourth photo from the left showed a low patch of ground between two large trees. Sunlight slanted from the right, casting long tree shadows. But in the center, on soil that looked freshly disturbed and pooled with rainwater, was something small, a faded pink ribbon, dirt-stained, crumpled, and tossed aside. "This one. When did you take it?" Maggie asked, her voice hoarse. Diane was slightly taken aback by the sudden change in her reserved neighbor's demeanor. "Oh, about 3 weeks ago. Scout was digging around there, and I thought it looked interesting, so I snapped it." The area was still a mess then. Maggie stood, stepping closer to the frame. Her eyes didn't leave the ribbon. Lena had one just like it. A birthday gift Maggie had custom-made, satin with embroidered flowers, one for each girl, purple for Lara, pink for Lena. She still kept Lara's purple one in her daughter's keepsake box. "Can you show me the original photo on your camera?" Maggie asked, her voice low but firm. Diane hesitated, then nodded. "Sure. Give me a moment." Diane disappeared into another room, leaving Maggie standing before the photo, transfixed. When Diane returned with the digital camera, Maggie leaned in, examining each image. When the photo appeared on the larger, clearer screen, her heart seemed to stop. Not just the ribbon. Nearby was a small porcelain button, chipped at one corner, with a faint blue daisy design, the kind she'd sewn onto Lara's dress. Her hands trembled. "This spot, do you remember exactly where it is?" Maggie asked. Diane pointed to a satellite map on her phone. "Near the east side of the forest, about a 5-minute walk from the house. Scout loves that spot. There's a big rotten tree stump, and the ground's damp and easy to dig." Maggie didn't hesitate. "I want to go there, now." Though the afternoon was turning to dusk, and the cold autumn breeze was rolling in, the two women followed a narrow trail behind the house, through dry leaves and broken branches. Scout ran ahead, sniffing eagerly. When they reached the spot from the photo, Maggie recognized it as unchanged from her memory. Silent, damp, and seemingly cut off from the outside world. The rotten stump loomed like a giant arm rising from the earth, and beneath it, fresh signs of disturbed soil, not yet settled after the week's rain. Maggie knelt, her hand touching the muddy ground, her heart pounded like a drum in her head. She couldn't dig, but Scout did it for her. The dog began clawing furiously, so eagerly that Diane had to call him back. A piece of fabric emerged from the wet soil, a dark pink ribbon, the exact kind Maggie had bought, and beside it, a child's silver bracelet, engraved with a tiny L, tarnished by time. Maggie broke down. No sound, just tears streaming down her cheeks, silent as 30 years of waiting. Diane stood frozen, her face pale. She pulled out her phone to call the police. Maggie remained kneeling by the soil, clutching the bracelet, as if afraid it would vanish again. Above them, the sunlight had faded entirely. The cold seeped into their bones, and for the first time in all those years, the earth had revealed something, a small but deep crack in the curtain of memory Maggie thought would never part. When the police car arrived, dusk had settled, and headlights pierced the thin fog, as if the forest were exhaling whispers from the past. 2 officers from Jefferson County Sheriff's Office stepped out, their flashlights sweeping the damp ground where Scout had dug. They asked everyone to step back, to set up a temporary barrier, and one called headquarters for a crime scene investigation unit. Maggie sat on a nearby rock, the silver bracelet cradled in her palm, as if holding it tighter could rewind the past, opening it like a book long sealed. A young officer named Jordan Miller, tall and measured, asked softly, "Are you sure this bracelet belongs to one of the girls?" Maggie didn't answer immediately. She opened her wallet, pulled a faded photo from a worn leather pocket. 2 girls in the backyard on their 6th birthday. Lena, smiling brightly, had the silver bracelet gleaming on her left wrist. "It's Lena's," she whispered, unsure if she was speaking truth or clinging to an illusion. The officer nodded, gloved hands placing the evidence in a sealed plastic bag. At that moment, Scout barked loudly and began digging aggressively to the right of the rotten stump. Diane tugged the leash to stop him, but the dog growled so fiercely that another officer reached for his baton. "Wait," Jordan said firmly. "Let him work." Under the flashlight's beam, Scout's claws tore through the soil, unearthing layers of hardened time, and then it appeared, a small wooden box, nearly rotted, with rusted iron edges, buried shallowly. The police immediately cordoned off the area, ordering everyone back. Maggie held her breath as the box was lifted, placed carefully in a protective tray, and opened with specialized tools. The smell of damp rot, rusted metal, and a long silent past wafted out, as if time, compressed for 30 years, could finally exhale. Inside were 2 pairs of children's canvas shoes, decayed and faded, but recognizable, one with a rabbit design, the other with roses, the exact shoes Maggie had bought for Christmas 1990. There was also a crumpled letter, scrawled in blue ink, "I'm sorry, I tried to take care of them." No signature. The lead investigator, Peter Hollis, a middle-aged man, arrived the next morning with a thick file on the 1991 disappearance, now reopened under case number Red 91-2. He had been an intern at the sheriff's office when the case began, barely in his 20s. "I remember this," Peter said, sitting across from Maggie in her living room. "It was the first case I touched, just fetching coffee for the lead investigator, but I remember those girls' faces clearer than any other case." Maggie nodded, her eyes fixed on the evidence box on the table. Peter pulled out copies of old statements, witnesses, scent dog reports, crime scene photos. No signs of a break-in, no struggle, no cries. "But as of today, we have a real lid." He laid out the bracelet, shoes, and letter in a row. "We're not in the dark anymore, and I promise, this time, we won't stop." Meanwhile, Diane shared a small but significant detail with the police. Scout had always been drawn to that spot during walks, but only in the last 3 weeks had he started digging aggressively. "Before, he'd sniff and move on," Diane said. "But lately, he's been obsessed." The police began considering the possibility of more buried evidence and expanded the investigation around the stump. They found additional scraps of rotted cotton fabric, a second button, and strangest of all, a small rusted kitchen knife with a broken handle, caked in thick mud. No blood traces, but its presence carried the weight of time. Peter ordered the entire 30-meter radius around the stump sealed off. As the forensic team dug deeper, they found an unusual soil structure. It seemed someone had once dug a large pit and refilled it with different soil. Night fell, the forest now lit by high-powered lamps, and Scout was sent home at the investigators' request. Maggie stood behind the police tape, her eyes locked on the pit being carefully excavated. At this moment, her heart held not fear but a familiar pain, honed over 30 years, now rising in a sharper, clearer form than ever. And with each inch of earth turned, she knew, time was no longer dormant. It was being unearthed, layer by the claws of truth. Peter Hollis sat in the temporary office near the scene, the desk lamp casting light on the thick file labeled Whitmore Twins, 1991. On the table, faded black and white photos from old faxed copies lay beside the latest drone-shot crime scene images. 2 points in time, 3 decades apart, now overlapping as if never separated. Wearing reading glasses, he tapped his finger on a note. Last person known to be near the scene that day, Kenneth Doyle. The name had faded into obscurity, but now resurfaced like an old shadow. Kenneth, then 42, single, a plumber, and reclusive, lived a block from the Whitmores. According to townsfolk, he often stood at his second-floor window, overlooking his backyard, and the Whitmores' yard where Lena and Lara played. Maggie had never been close to Kenneth, but she remembered how he watched her daughters, not with affection, but with a quiet stare that chilled her spine. In 1992, after a year of no progress, police questioned Kenneth once. He claimed he was fixing a pump for a client 30 miles away that day, with a receipt to prove it. Oddly, after that interview, he left Maple Hollow without notice. His house was abandoned, his car sold, and no one could reach him. "Did we miss something?" Peter muttered, marking Kenneth's name in red on the investigation chart. Meanwhile, Maggie was called in to give a new statement. She sat across from Peter in the temporary container office, hands gripping her gray wool coat, silver hair slightly tousled. "I still remember, so clearly," she said slowly. "That noon, it wasn't too hot, with a light breeze. I was cooking lunch when I heard Lena shout something, then laugh, then silence. Just a few minutes later, I went to the yard, and nothing was there." She paused, eyes fixed on a sketch Peter handed her. A diagram of the backyard and wind direction that day, When I stepped through the back gate, I felt like someone had just been there, seconds before. No sound, no figure, but a smell. What smell? Peter asked gently. Like smoke, but not cigarettes. Something faint, familiar, but I've never been able to place it. Peter noted the detail, then flipped open the old file. Did you ever see anyone suspicious around the house before that day? Maggie paused. No one specific, but Kenneth Doyle came to our house a few times, saying he was checking on plumbing. He'd stare at the girls and didn't seem to care about the pipes. Thomas was annoyed, wanted to report him, but I said not to make a fuss without proof. Peter nodded, placing an AI-reconstructed sketch of Kenneth's face from old photos before Maggie. Did you ever see him taking photos or drawing? Maggie flinched. Yes. Once I caught him sketching something in a notebook near our back fence. When I approached, he hid it and tucked it in his pocket. Peter noted the detail. Kenneth's record stopped after he vanished. No one knows where he went. There were rumors he changed his name, lived in Southern California for a while, then disappeared again. Outside, Scout barked loudly as the forensic team found another scrap of fabric, this time with a pattern matching the dress Lara wore that day. Peter glanced at the live feed from the scene, then turned back to Maggie. I want you to look at this. He opened his laptop, displaying the birthday photo of Lena and Lara that Maggie had provided. Two children standing in front of a birthday table, with a man in a gray shirt and wide-brimmed hat, faintly visible behind a tree in the background. This could be random, but do you see anything in the top right corner? Maggie squinted. A dark dot, or rather a camera lens. Someone else was taking pictures of us from behind the bushes. Possibly, Peter said. The photo was developed at the town's old photo shop, closed since 1995. I'm trying to track down anyone who worked there. A chill ran down Maggie's spine. A figure, a gaze, a silence stretching 30 years, all now converging on a breaking point. What scared her most wasn't who the culprit might be, but the eerie, vague feeling someone had always been watching them, knowing every corner of their backyard, and vanished into thin air without leaving a footprint. Maggie looked at Peter, her voice almost a whisper. I think I forgot something important, something that only when time is dug up, it resurfaces. And Peter understood. They weren't just investigating a disappearance anymore. They were chasing a piece of memory hidden for 3 decades by the most terrifying silence of all. The silence of someone who knew exactly how to disappear. After that interview, Maggie returned home with trembling hands and a mind stirred by hundreds of scattered memory fragments. Instead of going to the living room as usual, she slowly climbed the stairs to the small room that had stored family belongings for years. On a rotting wooden shelf stood a dark brown trunk, its surface still bearing old scratches from when Thomas dragged it into the corner after the case was closed. She opened the lid, the dry creak of hinges echoing in the quiet space. The smell of old paper, fabric scraps, and wood dust rose faintly. Stacked photo albums, some faded, some still wrapped in yellowed plastic, filled the trunk. Maggie pulled out a navy blue album, thick and labeled by hand. 1991, Family. Her hands shook slightly as she turned the pages, her eyes pausing at moments she thought had vanished from memory. Lena and Lara beaming by a tulip garden. Thomas carrying both girls on his shoulders during an early spring picnic. The 6th birthday photo with a whimsical rabbit-shaped cake, and finally, the photo Peter had shown on his laptop yesterday. But this time, in the original, Maggie noticed a detail she'd never seen before. In the backyard photo, beyond the 2 girls and the birthday table, a man stood partially hidden behind a maple tree on the right side of the frame, his face obscured by foliage. What stunned Maggie was his left hand, wearing a black leather strap watch with a rectangular face, a long scratch on its right edge. That watch belonged to Kenneth Doyle. Thomas had mentioned it once during a bowling game, saying Kenneth always bragged about it being a rare German piece. Maggie had never thought to closely inspect old photos. She turned another page, then another, until she stopped at a photo taken from the backyard toward the fence at the garden's end. Lena and Lara were playing with building blocks, and on the other side of the fence, clearly visible, was the silhouette of an adult bending down, holding something like a small mirror or camera. A slanted ray of sunlight made one side of the image overexposed, but the reflection on the object faintly showed the 2 children. But not from the photo's angle, from behind them, as if he was secretly photographing from the other side of the fence. Maggie slammed the album shut, her heart pounding. She carried the entire album downstairs, placed it on the dining table, and called Peter that night. 15 minutes later, he arrived with an image analysis specialist. The three sat around the old wooden table, the yellow lamplight illuminating the album's cover like it was shining on a decayed piece of the past. "Are you sure this is Kenneth's watch?" Peter asked. Maggie nodded without hesitation. "No mistake. Thomas mentioned it, the exact watch face with an L-shaped scratch. Kenneth wore it on his left wrist. He was right-handed." The specialist began scanning the photos with a high-resolution device. When he reached the image of the man holding the reflective object, he paused, zooming in on each pixel. "There's something odd here," he muttered. "The reflection shows the two girls from behind. Yes, but there's a third figure." "What?" Maggie nearly leapt from her chair. "An adult, in dark clothing, standing right next to the girls. But in the original photo, this person isn't visible." Peter frowned. "The photo was taken from the front, so this figure only appears in the reflection." The specialist nodded. "It's highly likely the photographer was the one standing next to the girls, and the figure in the reflection is him." Peter immediately ordered the photo copied and sent to the forensic imaging lab for spatial reconstruction. But Maggie didn't stop there. She opened a wooden drawer, pulling out a small box of her daughter's keepsakes, birthday cards, drawings, and 2 tiny diaries. In one, Lena's, a scrawled entry read, "Uncle Kenneth gives us candy. But Laura doesn't like him. She says he looks like a forest ghost." Peter read the line, his face tense. "I think Kenneth didn't just watch. He approached them." Maggie looked at him, her eyes shattered. "I didn't notice. I let them play too many times without checking." Peter said nothing, only gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "We can't change the past, but we can make it stop being silent." Meanwhile, at the forensics lab, an unexpected discovery came in. The soil on the wooden box contained traces of burnt wood ash, motor oil, and faint traces of an old sedative, a type used in the 80s for sedation in nursing homes. This led Peter back to the old file, where a detail had been overlooked. Kenneth Doyle had worked as a maintenance mechanic at a small elderly care facility in the southern suburbs, just 30 minutes from Maple Hollow, a place shut down in 1992 for sanitation violations and lack of licensing. In the late-night light, Peter looked up at Maggie. "I believe Kenneth didn't act alone. Someone helped him or covered it up. And we are about to find them." The next day, as sunlight barely filtered through the dense trees of eastern Maple Hollow's forest, Peter, a team of investigators, forensic experts, and scent dogs arrived, guided by Diane, Scout. The large dog that had unwittingly unearthed the box hiding the past was restless again. He barked loudly and bolted northeast, past the forest's edge, where the terrain grew denser and rougher. They followed, crossing faint trails nearly erased by time. About 15 minutes later, Scout stopped at a thick patch of ferns, behind which a tree trunk was covered in vines and green moss. As if driven by a memory not his own, Scout clawed furiously at the soft soil, revealing a rotting wooden base, a low door half buried, concealed by loose planks. Peter stepped forward, signaling the team to halt. "This could be an old shelter or storage," he said, his voice tinged with tension. An officer removed the planks, brushing away dry leaves, and the low door gradually emerged, fitted into a rotted wooden frame. Gloved, Peter pulled hard. The door swung open, releasing a pungent smell of damp rot, decayed wood, and rat droppings, as if the space had been sealed by time for decades. They shone flashlights inside. Under the dim yellow light was a small wooden room, about 2 meters deep, with a low ceiling and crudely joined wooden walls, the roof leaking with dried water stains like cracks on aged skin. But what silenced everyone wasn't the room's decay. It was the traces of a child's life once present here. On the walls were scrawled chalk writings. "Lena, I'm scared of the dark. Lara cried last night. She didn't sleep. Mommy, I miss you." Pencil sketches of a son, a cat, and 2 girls holding hands. In the corner were 2 thin, worn mattresses, crudely patched, with neatly folded tattered blankets. A torn pillow, stuffing spilling out, lay tilted, as if someone had just left. Peter approached the back wall. Under thick dust was a small wooden frame, like a sealed vent, boarded and nailed shut with rusted nails. He pried it with a crowbar. After a few taps, the board gave way. Inside was a dark, shallow space, just big enough to hide a body. And there, another child's shoe lay neatly, beside a handkerchief, embroidered with an L. Peter turned away, fists clenched, and signaled the forensic team. The wooden house had clearly been used as a holding place, or temporary shelter, for two children, but not voluntarily. The hesitant scrawls, the whispered words, "I'll keep you safe." An officer found another small wooden box under a mattress. Inside were plastic toys, a broken comb, and a rolled-up note. Unfolded, it revealed faded writing. "Lara's sick. She can't breathe. She's so cold. Where did you go, Lena?" Peter felt his chest tighten. This wooden room had buried part of the truth. Not with concrete or steel, but with the silence of children. Unnoticed, unheard, for 30 years. Maggie was called to the site that afternoon. When she stepped onto the rotting floor, her eyes scanned each scrawl, each scratch, her trembling hand touching the crude drawing of two girls, holding hands. "Lena wrote left-handed," she whispered. "This is her writing." Near the torn pillow, she knelt, picking up the linen handkerchief. Her face held no tears. Just the quiet emptiness of someone who had waited too long, now touching the proof of a nightmare. Her daughters had been held here. Peter stood beside her, silent. After a moment, he spoke, his voice rough like gravel. "This wooden house didn't just exist in the forest. Someone built it, and someone allowed it to stay hidden." He pulled a newly copied file from his bag. "There's something you need to know. From 1989 to 1992, an unlicensed private rehabilitation center operated 3 miles from here. It was run by a woman named Nancy Cordero, accused of unlicensed psychological treatment, high-dose sedatives, and detaining minors. The case was buried for lack of evidence, and she left town after." Maggie clutched the handkerchief. "You think she's connected to this?" Peter nodded. "The wooden house is near land once owned by that center. I believe Kenneth Doyle worked maintenance there, and may have used this area to keep the girls without anyone knowing." Maggie closed her eyes. In this damp darkness, she could hear wheezing breaths, frightened whispers, and a child trying to keep her sister alive, day by day. The wooden house wasn't just a crime scene. It was the empty skull of memory where cries for help had echoed, unheard. And now, with the rotting walls exposed, time was spilling out the fragments of truth no one had dug for. Peter turned to Maggie. "I want to find Nancy. She's still alive, in a nursing home in Southern Oregon, with early-stage Alzheimer's. But maybe, some part of her memory hasn't faded." Maggie stood, her gaze resolute, as it hadn't been in years. "Let's go, we have to go. I want to ask her one question: how did my daughters leave this place?" And so, they stepped out of the damp wooden house, leaving behind the fading pencil marks in the afternoon light. Where two children once held hands in the dark, one who couldn't leave, and one who, if alive, might still be finding her way back. Just a day after leaving the abandoned wooden house, Peter received a call from an unidentified number. On the other end was a hoarse, halting male voice, like wind through rotted planks. "I saw someone in Salem," he called Lena's name. Kept repeating it, like a lullaby. The voice faltered, then hung up before Peter could ask more. But it was enough to prompt a statewide record search for transients with unusual behavior in Salem, about 50 miles from Maple Hollow. Within hours, he had a name: Harvey Nolan, male. Around 60, admitted to a public psychiatric hospital after being caught talking to invisible people. Harvey had no fixed address. For years, he wandered parks, surviving on charity food and trash, but lingered only around a forested area near the city, where a defunct care facility once stood. Peter and a female officer, Brenna, went to Harvey's usual haunt, a wooded park nestled between two old residential areas, rarely visited. They found him sitting by a large poplar tree, his long matted hair tangled, holding a small wooden doll with a chipped ear. Strangely, the doll had 2 paper tags on its clothes, one labeled Lena, the other Clara. Peter sat across from him, his voice gentle, as if speaking to a child. "Hello, Harvey. I'm Peter. I want to ask about Lena. You mentioned her, right?" Harvey looked at him, eyes cloudy like stagnant water, then suddenly smiled. "Lena was good. Knew how to stay quiet. Always held her sister's hand." Peter leaned forward. "What was Lena's sister's name?" Harvey looked up, eyes wide. "Laura," but she coughed. Coughed until her lips turned purple. I told them, don't give her well water, but she didn't listen. Who's she? Peter asked softly. Harvey whispered. The white-haired woman smelled of medicine, sleeping pills. Always carried a small bottle. Lena was scared of her. His voice broke into fragments. Like tangled thread. Brenna nodded subtly. Harvey's disjointed words matched odd details from the old file. Sedatives. A white-haired woman. Contaminated well water. Peter pulled out a black and white photo of the wooden house and placed it before Harvey. Were you ever here? Harvey looked at the photo, his face paling. He touched its edge, trembling as if it might burn. There, cold place. No light at night. Lena told me not to cry, but Lara couldn't sleep, kept asking for her mom. Peter pressed, his voice firm. Did you take the girls there? Harvey shook his head vigorously. No, not me. A man. Wore a hat, crooked smile. Hands smelled of iron. He brought them. I just kept watch. Peter's eyes narrowed. Kenneth? Kenneth Doyle? Harvey froze. After a suffocating silence, he nodded. Yes. Ken. Ken brought them, then left. Gone. Just her. And me. Peter knew he couldn't push further. He lifted the doll, flipping it to find small carved words on the back. Sisters, never apart. He signaled Brenna to take Harvey to the hospital for another psychiatric evaluation. On the drive back to Maple Hollow, Peter reviewed Harvey's file for years. He'd been a gardener at the care facility Nancy Cordero ran. After its closure, he lost his job and began wandering. His mind fractured, but the memories he held never vanished. They were merely hidden, like the wooden house in the forest. When Peter called Maggie, she asked one question: what did he say about Lena? Peter hesitated, then answered. He said Lena was the one who protected her sister, the one who knew how to stay silent. The line went quiet for a long moment, then Maggie sighed softly. Then maybe she had to learn silence to survive, and I have been silent too long. That night, Peter sat alone before the caseboard, pinning the doll's photo among the current images and maps. He drew a red string connecting Harvey, the wooden house, and Nancy's old care facility. A triangle emerged. At its center, he circled a name in black ink. Lena Whitmore, who might still be alive somewhere under a different name, with memories warped like Harvey's whispers, and if she'd learned to stay silent to survive, it was time for someone to speak up to find her. The next morning, fog still clouded the car's windshield as Peter and Brenna drove to southern Oregon, to Suncrest Haven, a small nursing home nestled among old pines. This was where Nancy Cordero, who ran the unlicensed rehabilitation center, shut down in 1992, lived out her final days. Now over 80, with early-stage Alzheimer's, her memory flickered. But Peter believed even a sliver of it could reveal the truth hidden for 30 years. In her room, they found a frail woman by the window, staring blankly at a wildflower garden. Her white hair was neatly tied, her hands trembling in her lap. The nurse whispered. She often repeats a phrase, but no one quite understands it. Peter sat beside her, his voice steady. Hello, Nancy. I'm Investigator Hollis. I want to ask about some girls. Nancy didn't react at first, her eyes fixed on the garden, but suddenly, her voice echoed like a sound from a deep well. 2 angels in a paper box, one stayed silent, one coughed every night. Peter felt goosebumps rise. What are you saying? Nancy turned, looking at him as if seeing a face for the first time. I saw them, wrapped in blankets, tiny hands, cold as ice. Brenna pulled out Lena and Lara's photo from the file, placing it before her. Do you recognize these girls? Nancy leaned close, her eyes trembling. Then, unexpectedly, her shaky hand touched Lena's image. Fitzwin sang to her sister. Wordless songs, like forest wind. I told her to stay quiet, but she kept whispering. Peter took a deep breath. Where did you meet them? Nancy began repeating. 2 angels in a paper box, one stayed silent, one coughed every night. By the 5th time her voice choked. I just wanted to keep them safe. But he said, I had to stay quiet. He said he'd take them somewhere else. Peter pressed, who's he? What's his name? But Nancy shrank back, muttering, the cellar wasn't locked. Cries no one heard. The conversation couldn't go further. Peter knew her memory was crumbling, leaving only disordered fragments. But they were real. On the drive back, he called the Maple Hollow team to dig into property and personnel records tied to the old center. An hour later, a report came. A temporary nurse at the center, Marla Boone, had handled medication and inventory. She'd never been investigated. Now Marla worked part-time at another care facility in Idaho. Peter decided to meet her in person. 2 days later, they arrived at Clearwood Residence, where Marla Boone worked. In her 60s, thin, with gray hair and round glasses, her face was calm, like someone who'd learned to let nothing touch her. Peter introduced himself, presented a temporary summons, and requested a private interview in the visitor's room. At first, Marla denied everything. "I was just a temp. Never dealt with kids outside dispensing meds." But when Peter placed the silver L bracelet before her, followed by a copy of the letter from the wooden house, childish handwriting, stating, "Laura's sick. She's cold." "Where did you go, Lena?" Marla froze. Her hands trembled visibly. "I don't know that letter," Peter cut her off. "You dispensed drugs at Nancy Cordero's center. One drug found in the soil at the scene was chloral hydrate, a sedative used for severe patients. Do you remember giving it to anyone?" Marla stayed silent for a long time. Then she exhaled, her eyes clouding. "I didn't know their real names. I was called in one July morning. Nancy said 2 kids needed stabilizing. One had a high fever, wouldn't eat, wouldn't talk. I was taken to a wooden room, smelled of rat droppings, rotted planks, and 2 girls lay under thin blankets." Brenna whispered, "Lena and Laura." Marla nodded. "I brought medicine, water, and some small toys. The younger one, Laura, I guess, had a bad fever. I said she needed a hospital, but Nancy said no. The next morning, she didn't wake up. She slowly wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. Nancy and a man took her away. I didn't ask his name, but he smelled of motor oil and limped slightly on his left leg." Peter froze. Kenneth Doyle had a leg injury from a pump repair in 1987. "What about the other one?" he asked. "Lena?" Marla whispered, eyes distant. Silent. Didn't cry, just looked at me, with eyes that kept me awake for weeks. I think she knew what was coming. Peter rested his hand on the file. "Do you know if Lena's still alive?" Marla looked at him, and for the first time, her eyes reflected a glint of painful light. "I don't know, but I remember the man saying he'd take her somewhere safer." After that, Nancy shut down the center. I never saw any of them again. Peter recorded her statement, then sat still, looking at the window. Outside, rain began to fall. The droplets on the glass blurred like the past, streaking through dissolving memories. One child was gone. The other, possibly alive. And if she was, for 30 years, she'd lived with an identity not her own, in a world where no one knew who she was. And that silence, the silence of a survivor, was what would lead them closer to the final truth. That afternoon, Peter returned to Suncrest Haven, with a new file and a heavy heart, like the gray clouds blanketing the sky outside. The morning's forest rain had made everything quieter than usual. He walked slowly down the nursing home's long hallway, where each room seemed to hold a fading life, memories crumbling into fragments no one bothered to piece together. But today, he wasn't here just for answers. He was here to confront. Nancy Cordero had been moved to a special care unit for severe dementia patients under close monitoring. When Peter entered, she sat with her back to him, staring at a small, half-open window where the breeze pushed a white curtain, carrying the scent of wet grass and antiseptic. She looked like a shadow, her silver hair cascading like mist on pine branches. "Hello, Nancy," Peter said, stepping closer, his voice slow, as if speaking to someone listening through the deepest layers of memory. "I want to tell you a story about 2 little girls. One didn't survive, and one, I believe, is still alive, under a name you and someone else gave her." Nancy didn't turn, but her hand twitched slightly. A small reaction, but enough for Peter to know some part of her was still listening. He placed a blurry photo before her, the silver L bracelet found in the wooden box. "This girl's name was Lena," he said. "She survived in a wooden house you used to hold children no one knew about. She was forced to stay silent, caring for her sister until she stopped breathing." Peter watched Nancy for a long moment, then continued, "I met Harvey Nolan. He said you were the only one who fed the girls, gave them water. He also said, you whispered to them, 'This is only temporary.' Is that true?" Nancy turned her head, very slowly. Her eyes were cloudy, like an unpolished mirror, but they reflected something real, something old. "I didn't want them to disappear," she said, her voice a dry rasp escaping a parched throat. "I thought I could save them from that world, the world that forgot them, but I was wrong. I didn't know how to love." Peter nodded gently, without judgment. "We have Marla Boone's statement," she said. "Laura died. and Lena was taken by a man. I believe that man was Kenneth Doyle. Do you know where he took her? Nancy closed her eyes, her frail hands clasped together, trembling. Ken said someone would adopt her, a place no one would know, no name, no past. He said it was humane. Humane? Peter's voice sharpened, but not harsh. Hiding a child for 30 years, changing her name, burying her memories under drugs and silence. You call that humane? Nancy shuddered, her voice cracking like fractured glass. I hear Lena crying every night. Even after all these years, she didn't cry with tears, she cried with silence. That silence. It's been killing me slowly. Peter sat quietly for a long time. Then he pulled another photo from his pocket. Not of Lena from years ago, but of a woman today. Angular features, strong eyes with a faint familiar depth. Do you recognize her? Nancy looked, and in a single second, her hand flew to her mouth, eyes widening. Lena, she whispered. No, her name is Mira now, Peter said. And you created that name. She remembers nothing. Doesn't know her real mother. Doesn't know she had a sister. She's a volunteer at a local health organization, and just days ago, she unknowingly met the mother she never recognized. Nancy pulled her hand back, clutching her chest. I cut her hair, dyed it brown so no one would know. I tore up the old photos. I told her not to trust her dreams, that they were just tricks of a tired mind. Peter looked at her, his voice lower than ever. Why did you do it? Nancy let out a near-silent breath. Because I was scared. Scared she'd remember. Scared she'd hate. Scared she'd tell the truth. And I couldn't live another day with that. Outside the window, the wind picked up, lifting the curtain like a sigh from a soul just named. Peter stood. He didn't need more. The belated confession was clear. But more importantly, Lena had lived, and her memories, though buried, still held fragments waiting to be pieced together. As he left the room, the nurse asked softly, "Did she say anything important?" He shook his head. Nothing new. But for the first time, she didn't lie. On the drive back to Maple Hollow, the rain persisted. In Peter's heart was another void. Not of the past, but of the future. How would Lena, or Mira, react to the full truth? Could memory forgive, or would it be a second knife, cutting deeper into what had been forgotten? Whatever the answer, he knew one thing. The name Lena Whitmore would no longer be a secret buried in forest soil. It would live again, in words, tears, and the pent-up anger of 3 decades. And that was when justice would begin to speak. That afternoon, as Peter and Officer Brenna returned to the temporary headquarters in Maple Hollow, a package had arrived. No sender, no recipient address. On the gray cardboard box, a single line in cold black ink, sharp as a blade, to investigator Peter Hollis. What remains? Peter opened the box in front of the team. Inside was a small wooden box with a hinged lid, dark brown, wrapped in old lace. As the lid lifted, everyone fell silent. The box held 3 items: a torn piece of a child's cotton shirt, a faded pencil drawing, and a small cassette tape. A folded note bore trembling words, "I can't hold this memory any longer. It's time for those who deserve to know." The drawing depicted a forest with 2 girls standing under a large tree, holding hands. One was taller, with long hair and big eyes. The other, smaller, head bowed, clutching her stomach. A childish note read, "Laura's sick. Lena won't let her sleep alone." Peter looked at the cassette. Fortunately, a veteran officer had an old recorder in storage. They inserted the tape and played it. Static hissed first, wind, trees rustling, then a woman's trembling, halting voice. "My name is Marla Boone. I'm recording this because I can't carry it in my heart anymore." The room was still. Marla's voice on the tape wasn't the woman Peter met days ago. This was desperate, like someone standing at an abyss. "I thought I wasn't doing anything wrong. I followed orders. I gave medicine, cleaned, stayed silent. But I knew. I saw 2 girls. One coughed endlessly, burning with fever. I said they had to take her to a hospital. But Nancy said no need. I still hear her words. Death is also a form of cleansing." The tape paused for a few seconds, then continued. "That night, Laura died. I don't know exactly when. I came in, saw Lena holding her, eyes wide open. I called Kenneth Doyle. He came with a canvas bag. He wrapped Laura up, said nothing. Then he was gone." Marla's voice broke, like she was crying. "The next morning, Lena didn't speak. She just handed me a wooden doll, pressed it into my hand. On its back was carved, 'No one can forget her.' I've kept it, until today. I'm sorry. Peter removed the tape. The room remained silent, but now it was the silence of a storm about to break, not of obscurity. There was no doubt. Lara had died in the wooden room. A death unreported, unburied, and Lena had been taken by the very man once suspected, enabled by a network of silence and crime. Peter issued a warrant to trace Kenneth Doyle's last whereabouts, from fake IDs to unidentified bodies across the state, over 30 years. Though he knew the chances of Doyle being alive were slim, what he left behind, memories, trauma, loss, lived on through Lena. That afternoon, Maggie arrived at the investigation office, holding a small tin box. I have something to give, she said, eyes fixed on Peter. Inside was a broken silver necklace, a crumpled note with Lena's name in childish handwriting, and a daisy-shaped button. These were in the girls' room, she said, fingers brushing the box's edge. I kept them, like relics. Now I think they belong where they should. Peter looked at her, voice thick. We'll reopen the case, officially declaring Lara Whitmore a victim of murder and unlawful detention. Maggie nodded. No more tears. Only the gaze of a mother who had walked the path of suffering and now faced the truth she'd longed for, cold as Lara's hand once was. That evening, Peter sat alone in his office. On the desk were all the files, evidence, photos, statements, arranged in a seamless chain he'd pieced together. He looked at Lena's photo, or rather, Mira Thomas, the name she now carried. She didn't know everything yet, not about the wooden house, not about her sister's death, not about being taken away silently. Her hair cut, memories erased, name changed. But now, it was time for her to know. He wrote a letter, long and careful, each word a distillation of 30 years of searching and enduring for those who survived. Dear Mira Thomas, or Lena Whitmore, if you still believe in your true name, he wrote, as if to his own daughter. And as he folded the letter, he knew every truth, no matter how long buried, would find its way back. Under the golden lamplight, in Maggie's tin box, and in Marla's trembling words, a story thought rotted was coming alive. Like a seedling sprouting from barren soil, where tears fell like early rain. A memorial for unsolved disappearances was held on a chilly Sunday afternoon in late October at Maple Hollow's town square. On a small makeshift stage, old photos printed on banners swayed in the breeze, innocent faces, fading with time, each a story without an end. Maggie stood silently in the crowd, a gray scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, clutching a bouquet of white daisies, Lara's favorite flower. She didn't speak, didn't sit in the family section. She stood at the edge, like an outsider once at the heart of tragedy, now just a quiet shadow. Peter stood beside her, watching, but saying nothing. The ceremony passed in solemn silence. Names of victims were read over the loudspeaker, each a bell tolling in the chests of the living. When Lara Whitmore was called, Maggie closed her eyes, her trembling hand pressing her chest, as if holding a breaking heartbeat. But in that moment, she opened her eyes, and saw a young woman not far away, with light brown hair, wearing a white Red Cross volunteer jacket. She was handing out blankets to the elderly, bowing politely, but it was the small star-shaped birthmark on her left wrist, exposed when her sleeve rolled up. That froze Maggie. She couldn't be mistaken. That birthmark, Lena had since birth, a rare genetic mark, the doctor had said. It didn't fade with time. No one could fake it. Maggie pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding to the point of suffocation. The young woman looked up as she approached, slightly startled. "Do you need anything, ma'am?" she asked warmly. Maggie froze for a moment, her eyes meeting the woman's. Not the face, not the voice, but those eyes. The eyes of a 6-year-old who once stood at the backyard gate, looking back at her mother one last time. "What's your name?" Maggie asked, her voice hoarse. The woman stepped back slightly, cautious. "I'm Mira Thomas. I volunteer for the community health organization." Maggie didn't look away. "Where were you born?" Mira hesitated, confused. I'm not sure exactly. My records say I was adopted in 1992 from a temporary care center in Nevada. My adoptive mother passed away. She didn't know much either. I've never traced my roots." Peter stepped forward, gently showing his badge. "We have reason to believe you may be the sole survivor of a 1991 disappearance in Maple Hollow. Are you willing to take a DNA test, Mira?" She froze. "What? No, that's impossible. I've never been anywhere called Maple." Her voice faltered, her eyes bewildered. Maggie just stood there, not advancing, not reaching out. She knew a truth this big couldn't crash into someone so suddenly. A week later, the DNA results arrived on Peter's desk. A 99.9987% match. Mira Thomas was Lena Whitmore, the surviving twin from the disappearance that once shook the state, long thought dead. Peter called Mira. The initial conversation was tense. She couldn't believe it. Not the old photos, the real name, or a past she didn't remember. But slowly, through images of the wooden room, the scrawled writings, the doll carved with "No one can forget her," cracks in her memory began to form. "I have recurring dreams," she said, during a meeting with Peter and Maggie at the investigation office. "I'm in a wooden room, it's cold, someone's feverish, someone's holding my hand. I thought it was just imagination." Maggie looked at her, eyes brimming with tears. "It wasn't, sweetheart, that was your sister. That was Laura." Mira fell silent. She didn't cry, she touched her wrist, where the birthmark remained, as if for the first time it became living proof, undeniable, of an identity she'd never dared claim. After a long pause, she whispered, "Why don't I remember anything?" Peter spoke gently. "Because they tried to erase it. With drugs, a new name, years of living a lie. But the truth, it doesn't vanish. It just waits for someone to touch it." Maggie placed a small object on the table. The old silver bracelet, the only thing intact through 30 years of time and pain. Mira looked at it, then at Maggie. For the first time, it wasn't a stranger's gaze. It was something awakening, like a final memory, rising from the depths of oblivion. And when she reached out, taking the bracelet, Peter knew, the story's final part, not quite an ending, was beginning to be rewritten by the survivors. Not with tears, but with confrontation. Not with anger, but with a whisper. "Little sister, I'm back." When Mira, or Lena, left the police station that morning, the sky seemed to open for the first time after days of gray rain. Sunlight filtered through Maple Hollow's tall trees, spilling onto the small roads where memories once seemed buried under layers of time. She walked quietly, still clutching the silver bracelet. A small thing, but heavy enough to shift an entire life. She didn't go straight home. Instead, Mira went to the old cemetery at the town's edge, where Peter had arranged a temporary memorial for Lara after the case was confirmed, with Maggie's consent. The headstone held no body, only a name carved in straight, resolute lines. Lara Whitmore, 1985-1991. She was always with you. Mira stood before the stone for a long time. No tears, just the breeze, carrying the familiar yet strange scent of earth and pine. In her mind were fragmented images, a small bed against a wooden wall, a tiny trembling hand clutching her shirt in the cold night, coughing that dragged on like it was being choked, and her own wordless lullaby as she tried to soothe a feverish child. She'd thought they were nightmares. They were memories. "Do you remember me?" Mira whispered, head bowed. "Or have you gone so far you can't hold my image anymore?" She knelt, placing a small cloth doll on the grave, a replica of the wooden doll found in Harvey Nolan's hands. Mira had sewn it herself after a sleepless night, a way to stitch together the stolen past. Maggie arrived minutes later, saying nothing, only placing a bouquet of white daisies beside it. Mother and daughter stood together, no words needed. They didn't need to rush to bridge 30 years with language. Just existing in that moment, facing the place that held a part of them, was enough. Days later, Peter held a small press conference at Maple Hollow's town hall. The story of the 1991 twin disappearance was no longer a local legend, but a case officially closed with answers. Lara Whitmore died from detention and lack of medical care, while Lena, under the false identity of Mira Thomas, survived, her past erased by those who chose silence over confrontation. "We won't press charges against Nancy Cordero due to her medical condition and age," Peter told the press. "But history won't stay silent. The truth will be recorded, fully, undeniably." Mira sat in the back of the hall among the audience. As people applauded the thanks to the investigation team, she only bowed her head. She didn't feel relief. She felt empty. Partly because she didn't know where she belonged. She wasn't Mira, but she was no longer the Lena of old. The past had made her something suspended between two worlds, between the dead and the survivor. After the press conference, Peter approached her. "I know you still have many questions," he said gently. "You don't need to answer them now. Just know, for the first time in 30 years, You don't have to search for your name anymore. Mira nodded. But I still don't understand, why was I spared? Why did I survive, and my sister didn't? Peter didn't answer immediately. He pulled a small item from his pocket, an old diary page from Maggie's keepsake box. The childish, scrawled handwriting was Lena's. She's feverish. I don't sleep. I cover her. I sing. I don't cry. I'll keep her safe. Peter handed the page to Mira. You saved your sister the only way a 6-year-old could, with silence, with strength, and ultimately, by surviving. That evening, Mira visited Maggie's home for the first time, not as a guest, but as a daughter returning. The house was unchanged. The living room still held the 1991 photo. She climbed the stairs, step by step, until she opened the door to the twins' old bedroom. Everything was there. The twin beds side by side, faded stuffed animals, the purple-patterned curtains glinting in the afternoon light. She approached the left bed, hers. Her hand touched the pillow, then lifted the sheet. Beneath was a small, folded note, as if placed long ago. She opened it. The scrawled, faded ink was still legible. Lena, I'm not scared if you're here. I love you. Lyra. Mira broke down. Unrestrained at last. 30 years of tears surged, tearing through her chest like a flood. Maggie entered the room, gently embracing her from behind. No words, none needed. Just the warmth of a mother who had lost her child, now holding her again, whole, even if under a different name, a different life. The next day, Mira began writing. Not a report, not a memoir, a letter to Lara. Dear little sister, I'm sorry for staying silent so long. I'm sorry for leaving you in that cold room, though I know I had no choice. But now, I'm back. For 30 years, I didn't know who I was. They called me Mira. But now I know, I'm Lena. I'm your sister. And you live in me, every breath, every dream. I'll tell our story. I won't let anyone forget. I won't let any other child be buried in silence like you. I promise. Forever, Lena. And when the letter was placed on the cold gravestone, with a freshly bloomed white daisy, Mira, now Lena again, knew, for the first time, she was no longer torn between two selves. She was the survivor. She was the final teller, and the first call from the past, answered by her very existence. The story of the Whitmore twins, Lena and Lara, is not just a tragic disappearance, but a profound reminder of the value of observation care in a community, and the role of memory, though buried, always enduring to be uncovered. In today's American society, where modern life often makes people indifferent to subtle warning signs, this story is a wake-up call. Sometimes, a strange glance, an odd behavior from a neighbor, like Kenneth Doyle, silently watching the girls through the fence, can signal a hidden crime. The community's indifference helped lose the chance to save Lara in time. In a society with robust welfare systems, this story underscores that systems are useless without people willing to speak up. Meanwhile, Lena, or Mira, embodies survivors, carrying suppressed trauma, like many real victims of abuse, detention, or identity violation. The story shows that healing lies not in forgetting, but in facing and naming the truth. The clearest lesson: trust your instincts, don't hesitate to question what feels wrong. And if you're a survivor, remember, telling your story is not just a right, it's an act to protect others from similar suffering. If you believe every truth deserves to be heard, please subscribe to join us in uncovering buried memories. Thank you for following, and we'll see you in the next story, where the past always demands an answer.